Hi, everyone. Welcome to this bonus episode of the History Unplugged podcast for the Knowlton's Rangers, the History Unplugged premium program. We're continuing our series on Ottoman lives, and now we're going to look at the person of the concubine, the slave girl in the Ottoman imperial harem that might remain a concubine, but she might become the mother of a sultan. Now, to talk about this issue, we're not just talking about concubines. We're really talking about the role of women in the Ottoman Empire, and more broadly speaking, the role of women in the Middle East. The images that probably come to mind aren't positive. Peasant women completely shrouded in black and forced to walk 10 paces behind their husbands, resembling the condition for women in Saudi Arabia now, but worse. On the higher end of the social strata, the numerous wives and concubines of the Sultan are locked away in the harem and forced to attend to whatever carnal whims enter his mind. So how true is this image? Well, in many ways, women had fewer rights in the late medieval Middle East than their European counterparts. Sharia law allows a man to have up to 4 wives. Divorce between the two parties was simple to obtain for a man. All it required was for him to repeat the dictum, "I divorce you," 3 times. It was so simple, in fact, that Ottoman court records are full of situations in which divorce occurred by accident, when one member of the party said the statement joking and didn't realize that the words were legally binding. While men could divorce easily, a woman's ability to initiate a divorce carried a financial penalty. It was more restrictive. So that's on the lower end of the spectrum, but what about conditions for upper-class women? It was different than Europe. The Ottoman sultans did not marry foreign queens. Rather, their wives were of slave origin and came from the harem. Since royal Ottoman concubines and wives were almost invariably from Christian lands in the Balkans, Armenia, or the Crimea, nearly all Ottoman sultans had a non-Muslim, non-Turkish woman as their mother. Or at least they weren't Muslim by origin, but later converted to Islam. This marriage system was likely a reason why the Ottoman Empire lasted for 6 centuries. Unlike medieval Europe, fiefs and domains were not constantly being contested due to royal marriages and the uniting of their lands to different households. But in other ways, Middle Eastern women had more freedoms and sometimes had more rights than their European counterparts at the time. They were landholders and had the right to control property. Some held fiefs used to pay for the state's military expenses. Women could register complaints to provincial courts on all sorts of matters, from property infringement to sexual violation. Thousands of these court records survive today, and they demonstrate that the state acknowledged these complaints and attempted to rectify them. Women could collect taxes on a local level and invest it into simple manufacturing businesses, such as silk production or textiles. Certain sectors of the economy were dominated by women, particularly cotton spinning. All right, so that's my long preamble about women in the Middle East and women in the Ottoman Empire. In this episode, we're going to look at the lives of, I would say, 2 of the most powerful women who rose through the system, Hürrem Sultan and Mahpeker Kösem Sultan. They were both wives of different sultans, mothers of sultans, and had a lot of power behind the scenes. First, I'll mention what the harem was and what it did before I look at their lives individually. The harem refers to the private domestic residence, and by extension, its female inhabitants. The royal harem at Topkapi Palace, where the Sultan held court, was particularly important because this institution was charged with the reproduction of the dynasty. The harem was by no means this free-for-all orgy for the Sultan. It was really quite the opposite. Sex and reproduction were carefully regulated within the harem, and especially within the royal harem. Albertus Bobovius, who was a Polish slave serving in the palace, compared the harem to a monastery due to its rigid hierarchy and enforced chastity of many of its residents. And that's because the children born to these women determined royal succession and was very crucial in politics. The word harem even comes from an Arabic word meaning forbidden or unlawful, but also sacred. The royal harem was a labyrinth of hallways, private apartments, libraries, dining rooms, mosques, and salons, which grew over the years with building additions. And the population within the harem also grew as a result of the dynasty increasingly preferring seclusion behind the walls of the palace. The queen mother, or Valide Sultan, the mother of the reigning sultan, was at the top of the harem hierarchy, Below her, the royal harem's population was divided into two groups: family members and harem administration. The family members included royal offspring, including underage boys and girls who had not yet entered puberty, and also royal consorts and unmarried or widowed princesses. The high-ranking harem administrators, all of them women, had large stipends and enjoyed considerable prestige. They supervised servants who worked in the harem and managed the training of select young women who had been chosen for higher things, such as marriage to a pasha, which was a general, or a chief administrator, or service to the sultan, or the valide sultan. So the harem trained girls and women for service to the dynasty, just as the palace school trained young boys to become janissaries. So like the boys being trained as janissaries, the young girls who entered the harem were also slaves, although in their case, they were usually captured beyond the borders of the Ottoman Empire, whether in slave raids or in the course of war. Those who left the harem to marry a member of the Ottoman elite were manumitted before the marriage. The most important task of the harem was the production of male heirs to ensure the continuation of the Ottoman dynasty. The Ottoman Empire was unique that it relied exclusively on concubines for this. Until Hürrem Sultan, there were no wives in the harem. But there were several advantages for the concubinage system and not having wives or queens or whatever. Because the Sultan could have as many concubines as he chose, there wasn't much of a danger of the Ottoman dynasty remaining without a male heir, as often happened with European royalty, so you wouldn't have civil war break out or extended family members battling for the throne. Also, under Islamic law, a husband and a wife were bound to each other through a number of rights and duties. This would limit the Sultan's absolute authority, but there's no such problem with a concubine. There were powerful concubines in the palace, but like everyone else in the palace, their power came from the ability to play the political game, but a wife would have legal guarantees. An ambitious girl could have no higher goal than to give birth to the Sultan. This would raise her far above other concubines, but put her in the running to become someday the valide sultan. And there is no more powerful woman in the empire than the mother of the Sultan. At any one time, there were likely several mothers and sons living within the confines of the harem. So palace politics revolved around the struggle to secure the throne for one's offspring. This wasn't an issue at the harem alone, because prominent men and women in the palace formed factions and threw their support behind one candidate or another. And they found other ways to exert their power. Ottoman princesses and their consorts could endow religious foundations and free slaves, and other acts of charity to endear them to the public and form their own faction and make it powerful so they could win out in political struggles. Ottoman women were laid to rest in imperial tombs after being honored in imperial funerals. They were the wives of sultans. The death of the mother of Sultan Süleyman was met with an outpouring of grief. So even though women in the palace harem were secluded, they were known and loved in an abstract way by the general public.